Okay, this is the basic gameplay of my new game, Pyro. Pyro is a cooperative, non-cooperative game in that there will be a winner if the team, represented by this guy, catches and proves guilty the Pyro, represented by that guy. Now, as you can imagine, the Pyro loves to do one thing. He loves to light fires. And so the team has to not only catch him and prove him guilty, but also has to put fires out. The Pyro wins if at the end of a turn, one of these buildings is 5 levels of fire high. They start off at 2, right? So that's how the Pyro wins. The Pyro wins if he escapes town out here without being captured. And the Pyro can also win if he is captured but is not guilty. All right, so there's kind of a clock within a clock there. So the Pyro is leaving and the town and trying to escape. The team is trying to catch him, but at the same time they have to catch him while he is guilty. Or what happens is if they catch him and he's not guilty, then he escapes and he moves ahead 3 moves. All right, so he continues on his way out of town. So that's the basic premise. The team has to work together to catch the Pyro, but you want to score the most points and win the game. But you can only win the game if the team works together and catches the Pyro. The way you score points by putting out fire. So let's say you put out a fire, you get to keep this. This player over here gets to keep that fire. They have 1 point. So each fire is worth 1 point. Along the way, as the team moves and tries to catch the Pyro, there are these water buckets. Water buckets are represented by this blue, and they're also worth 1 point. So whoever moves onto a bucket square gets a bucket token. That would be 1 point at the end of the game as well. What's nice about the buckets is later on at the game, at any point on a player's turn, if they want to, instead of making one of their regular legal moves, they can instead use this and put out fire. And so they basically exchange a bucket for fire. So since they're both worth points, they don't lose points in doing that, but they may actually help the team by keeping the fires under control. And you have to keep the fires under control because at the end of every round, every turn, each fire grows 1 higher if it's not completely put out. So that's the basic premise of how Pyro works. Now here's how we determine what happens in Pyro. So how does the Pyro move? How do players move? All that kind of thing. That's what these die are for. And so they're oriented. They have different symbols on each die. So there's a fire symbol. You can figure out what that does. There's a walk symbol. There is a plus symbol, which is kind of a bonus move. There's a do nothing symbol. There's also a justice symbol. And I believe that's all the symbols. And so each die has different symbols in different places. No 2 die are the same. All right. So how we determine what happens is whatever is facing you. So as this table is oriented, we have a player here, 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 and here. So whatever is facing you is what you get to play, or the 2 die faces that you get to play. So we'll just go this player since the camera can see that. So it's a fire and a justice. Now, since those are 2 different symbols, that player would have to decide on their turn, I'm either going to take fire and extinguish fire, or I'm going to add to the guilty scales of justice here to try to make sure that when they catch the Pyro, he is proven guilty. So that player would have a decision to make. Now this player over here that you can't see has 2 walks. Because they're both the same, he gets to do both of them. So he would get to walk twice and move our team player forward 2 spaces. So that's how each player moves. Each turn, whatever is facing you on the die determines what you get to do. So let's say that this happens. Let me find a plus here. So let's say that this is what's facing this player over here, the one that you can see. It's a fire and a plus. So you always do the thing that's not the plus, the bonus move first. So he would get to take fire, extinguish fire, and then the plus means he can either extinguish another fire or he can move. So he could extinguish this fire here, he could extinguish this fire here, he could move forward and collect a water bucket for a point here. So he has all kinds. As soon as you get a plus, you get all kinds of options. Now that's how players move. How does the Pyro move? The Pyro moves by what's on top. Simple as that. On the very initial move of the game, the Pyro does everything that's on top. So let's say we're at the beginning of the game. We've just started out. Our die are set. So the Pyro would do everything. So he would, on the first fire, he always starts a new fire because he's a Pyro. And then he would add one for the second fire symbol. He would add one to an existing fire, right? He would also, now, because in America, we're innocent until proven guilty, the Pyro starts out not guilty, and ties are not guilty as well. But he would also get another marker on not guilty. So now he's ahead 2-0 on the scales of justice. So that's the first turn, okay? That's on the initial turn of the game. The Pyro gets everything. Throughout the rest of the game, after we roll the die, and I'll explain that in just a second, the Pyro draws one of these cards, and there's an arrow on it that indicates the first player. So let's say this player over here was the first player for that turn. So we orient the card with the arrow towards that player. So now it lines up, and you can see that we don't do these two things, but we would do this. So that's good for the team because there's nothing there. So in this case, the only thing the Pyro would do would be light a fire on this particular turn. And these are all different. So on this one, everything happens. On this one, 3 things happen. And then again, they're oriented by this arrow according to who is the first player on that round. So they're constantly changing. So how do we manipulate the die? How do we decide what happens? Okay, that's what these cards are for. Every player gets 3 cards in this 4-player game, right? Every player gets 3 cards, and they all have different things on them. Well, most of them do, okay? They have directions as to what you can do to the die that is facing you and to your right. So in this example, this player would control the green die, this player would control the blue, this player controls the pink, and this player would control this red or orange one, right? So in this player's hand, there's a toss, which means he would just toss the die, and then however it's oriented towards him, that goes back on the game board. That's what a toss is. You got another toss. Those are the only 2 in the deck. And you got a spin tray. Now a spin tray is exactly what it sounds like. Spin tray spins the tray the direction that the arrows are moving. So in this case, he would spin it this way. Now the whole thing's reoriented, right? So that's what those die do. Other players would have things like roll back, roll forward. So that's this way, back towards you, forward away from you, roll left or right. So you would roll the die this way. This player has a spin the tray, has a rotate left, so it would rotate. This player has what? Rotate right, has a roll twice, so you basically flip it over. All this. So there's different ways that you manipulate the die, right? So what happens is after the initial turn where we all just randomly toss our die, see what happens, see what we get, see what the Pyro gets to do. Then for every other turn, each player is going to take their 3 cards and they're going to say, I want to do this one, right? And they'll all be, these are kind of secret. They'll say, I want to play this one. This one says this says this, and this player over here says, I want to play that card, right? Then those stay hidden. Simultaneously, everybody flips their cards over, and then whoever's the first player, so again, if this is the first player over here, they do their action first. So this player has a roll back, which means he would roll back towards himself, the die that he gets to manipulate, the one on his right. So he'd roll back there, right? This player has a toss. That's the card they're going to play. So they toss. It's oriented this way, so it goes back in the game like this. This player says they're going to rotate to the right, so he takes it and rotates. And then this guy now spins the tray this way and changes everything, right? Now we would go first player. We would say this is what the Pyro is going to do. So the Pyro gets to move first. And now each player, starting with the first player, looks at their 2 side. We go around, we decide what they're going to do. They make their moves, they get points, they collect fire, whatever. However they decide to play, they play the scales of justice, they move, whatever. And then at the end of the turn, every fire grows by 1. So if they didn't touch any of the fire, every fire would grow by 1. And we pass this card that you just played, goes to the person to your right. So that passes and goes to them. Now you have 3 new cards. Everybody looks at their card, decides what they want to play, and we just keep on going. Okay, we go again until one of these, one building is at 5 fires high at the end of our turn, so we just haven't had enough ability to put out fire, or if the Pyro escapes by moving, and he's got 2 move symbols on this particular turn, and then we win by catching him and proving him guilty. So we would have had to have enough justice votes to prove him guilty instead of being not guilty, and caught him on the game board before he escaped out of town. If that happens, if he's guilty and we catch him, then the player that's accumulated the most points wins the game through either fire or water buckets. Okay? So there becomes some interesting strategy points in here. It will just change throughout the game. Do I need to help the team? Do I need to help me? Sometimes if you're just feeling ornery, you can actually try to help the Pyro, help him escape. I don't know. But there's a lot of different things going on. Even though it's a very simple game, it plays very quickly. There's a lot of little strategy things to think about how you're going to manipulate your die. There's some table talk. There's a lot of interaction that goes on. If the team is, let's say that Pyro's clear up here and there's a lot of fire and the team is really working together, then there's going to be a lot of table talk and a lot of interaction. Don't spin the tray. Don't mess me up. Roll forward. Do whatever. So we try to work together to manipulate the die to our advantage. If it's close and maybe you want to catch him and maybe there's not a lot of fire on the game at that particular time, then you probably wouldn't say much and you just kind of do your own thing over here and play your own card to try to manipulate the die to help you. So very interactive, super easy, super fun. Plays in about 15 to 20 minutes once you know what you're doing. So it's easy to play a couple games in one sitting. And the games are all over the place. Sometimes there's tons of fire. Sometimes the Pyro just escapes and gets out of town. It's these random die. So you just never know in accordance with these cards. You just never know what exactly the Pyro is going to do. So every game is very, very different. All right. That's it. That's basic instructions of how to play Pyro. So my contact information will be at the end of the video on the screen. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thanks.